Great. So good morning, good afternoon, good day, all of the goods for everyone here today. Thank you for joining our office hour session, the Disaster Client Care Programs Seasonal Readiness Series. Today we are going to focus on disaster health services, disaster mental health, and disaster spiritual care. So we've got our subject matter experts on the line, and we're looking forward to a really great session. I know we had something like this lined up for our Back to Basics series last year, but unfortunately we had a couple of disasters in the September timeframe that caused us to pause. So really looking forward to this session today and sharing all this great information with you. We'll run through the agenda real quick, and I'll do some housekeeping and introductions, and then we will go ahead and get started with the meat of our presentation. Introductions, housekeeping, I just said. We're going to do some program overviews and then go through health services, mental health, spiritual care. We'll talk about our client care resources that we bring up on every single session, just like to reiterate it all the time, and then we'll open it up for questions. Our folks here today, our experts here are happy to have them. We've got, I'm really sorry if I butcher anybody's name. We've got Naomi Berkowitz representing our disaster mental health cadre, Mary Rose Bauer with Disaster Health Services, Thomas Margrave and Tim Serban for Disaster Spiritual Care. And then we've got Sarah Joyce on the line with, she's our manager of the Disaster Client Care Programs Group. Myself, Allison Weibel. I should have done myself last, but I already started, sorry. I'm the manager of our Disaster Client Care Readiness team. And then we've got Ariane Messina on the line. She is our Senior Associate of our Disaster Client Care Systems group. All right, I mentioned housekeeping. So we've got, this session is a Microsoft webinar meeting. It is scheduled for 90 minutes. We intend to use all 90 minutes. And I think with the great content that we've got here today, we will use a good chunk of this, but want to make sure we leave enough time for question and answers. All of your lines are muted. You're in listen only mode. We are asking that you type your questions in the Q&A box. So on the top of your team session, you should have a little icon that looks like two little bubbles with a question mark, and it's labeled Q&A. And so please use that feature. We will not be using chat or any of the raising hands or anything. We also understand that some participants may not have access to a Q&A. Teams is sometimes a lot of fun and doesn't give access to everything. So we are utilizing Mentimeter, and that will be shared at the end, the code that will be used. So write down any questions that you may have so you don't forget them. We do ask that with your question, you enter your name and region with your question, so it feels like we're having a conversation with you. We know who's here. We will be recording this meeting. Well, I've already started it, and we will be posting it to our client care programs office hour recording on the YouTube playlist soon after the event. In addition, I like to mention that since you all have registered or have attended previous office hour sessions, you are on a list that receives our invitation to the session, in addition to a thanks for joining email that will share the link to the YouTube playlist in addition to the slides, a PDF version of the slides. So you should receive that after this session as well. So office hours, why are we here? Well, we're here to focus on the Disaster Client Care Program seasonal readiness activities. These next several sessions planned throughout the summer into early fall are focused on those seasonal readiness activities. If you were here last summer, you may remember that we did our Back to Basics series, where we focused specifically on our programs. When we launched our program and the system, we did a lot of heavy work or heavy conversations around the system. So last year we brought it back to our basics. We brought it back to our programs. These sessions will have a mix of program information and system information, so you'll get a little bit of both. As it mentions here, program updates will be offered as they come in, and any reminders about our programs or any little hints, best tips, all those good things. Our favorite reason for doing this is that it's an opportunity to connect with you, the field, answer any questions, listen to any feedback that you may have. Mentioned that we are planning this through the beginning of the fall. So here you'll see our rough timeline. We've already had a few sessions. We had an overview, an event administration session, and now we are hosting our disaster health services, mental health, and spiritual care programs. You'll see that intake is coming up next. That is towards the end of July. Hard to believe we're talking about the middle of July already. And then some other really wonderful sessions that we have planned. We're not posting dates just yet, just to make sure that we've got a good timeline and taking into consideration disaster responses. But up and coming, we've got disaster casework, DRO coordination. I get to talk to you about RC care accounts and some disability integration session towards the beginning of October. So excuse me, keep all that in mind. So who should attend? Well, everyone is invited. Everyone is welcome to attend these sessions. There's no closed doors or anything. I think it's excellent for folks to join these sessions so that they may be able to get a good broad sense of our client care programs and some of the inner workings of the programs and how and the system. How do we communicate the session? So I've already mentioned one way, but I'll mention it again. The RC care, there's a couple of ways. Cross connection announcements. That's one of our main communication channels. We'll announce it there. We also use Yammer. We have a client care office hours email. That's what I mentioned with the invitations and the thanks for joining emails. The RC care update email that you should probably subscribe to. It's great to know what's going on with RC care and any updates that are coming in. It's a weekly email. We do also communicate this in routine meetings, our application support meetings, division advisor meetings, regional program lead meetings. And I know this time around there was some use of group share through Volunteer Connection. That might be another way that we'll start to do some of this as well. As I've already mentioned, but like to reiterate, if you cannot attend, we are recording. So we will be uploading this session to our YouTube playlist soon after the event. And then you'll also receive that link after this session concludes with that thank you for joining email. All right, with that, I am happy to turn this over to Sarah to go through our disaster client care programs overview.
Oops. All right, I have mic and camera now. So thank you so much, Allison. And I just wanted to let everyone know I'm going to give a pretty condensed version of an overview and just a little window into the 5-year disaster cycle services vision and plan, and then turn it right over to the team. So we'll go ahead and go right into the disaster cycle services 5-year plan. Those of you who were on our last office hours had the opportunity to hear Jack speak a little bit about this, and Brad and Pippa have also been presenting on it quite frequently. And one of the things we'll make sure is there's a video where Brad and Pippa talk through the plan, and we'll make sure that we add that to the email as well. This plan has been a culmination of work over time and really acknowledging that there are changes in our climate that have driven us from disasters being episodic or acute and is really becoming a chronic condition in American life, and that both exasperates and is exacerbated by other chronic social conditions. So the increasingly complex relief and recovery needs of the most historically marginalized households, individuals who are often have a harder time receiving services, has really accelerated the need and the way for us to think about how we provide services and how we adapt our work and think about our capacity. So this visual depicts what a successful implementation of that 5-year vision looks like. It really rests on 3 strategic priorities and then supported by 5 core actions. The 3 strategic priorities here are in the center of the vision, and really it's being the most trusted disaster relief provider, move service delivery from equality to equity, and then ensure that an encounter with a a client really transcends transactional and achieves transformational. And then it's surrounded by 3 strategic priorities. There are 5 core actions, and that's presence as a mission and a promise, improve access to service, resources to all, readiness and capacity building, simplify, and then health, hunger, and housing. And I really want to draw everyone, I think, to the transactional to transformational. And this is something that I think we've been having a lot of conversations about, is that a lot of the work that is happening in the field is transformational. And I think what it really is sometimes a transaction truly leads to transformation for a client. And being able to be there and part of that as a volunteer is just truly a gift to all of us. And really, as we think about in a thoughtful way what our plans look like from a national headquarters perspective and how you provide services in the field, I think it's really important that we give you the tools that no matter the transaction, it gives that client that opportunity for a transformational experience. And so I urge you all to listen to Brad and Pippa talk through the 5-year plan and learn and listen and also support and challenge us all around what these 5 core actions and the 3 strategic priorities, how we get there, and how we also look at how we're already doing so many of these things. Next, we have just a look at our client care programs branch. As you'll see, Jack Herman, which those of you who are on our last office hours had the opportunity to hear Jack speak. He is our Senior Director of the Client Care Programs. My unit consists of those client-facing programs. So Tom and Tim will be speaking to you from Disaster Spiritual Care. Mary Casey Lockyer is currently our Senior Program Manager for Disaster Health Services, and she is actually retiring tomorrow. So happy retirement to Mary. She's out actually doing a really large presentation for us today with a health sorority. So really happy and excited for Mary, but also looking to fill some pretty big shoes. Disaster mental health also falls within the unit, and that senior program manager position is currently open, and we'll be working towards recruiting for it in the near future. Stephanie Dawson recently joined us as our senior for disability integration. And Joanna King also recently joined us as our Senior Program Manager for Disaster Casework, and she's already working really closely with her volunteer counterpart, Flo Henkin. And I would be remiss if I didn't also mention Danelle, who is the volunteer counterpart to the Senior Program Manager for Disaster Mental Health. And Naomi, who's on the call with us today, is going to present for Disaster Mental Health while Danelle is deployed to Guam. And also a big thank you to Mary Rose, who has also agreed to join us this morning as a presenter. And Mary's done a lot of work with us, especially around being a subject matter expert when we're talking about disaster health services and RC care. The next program over to the left is the unit is the Disaster Client Care and Readiness and Planning Program. And so that is where Allison and her team, Dan, reside. And they help us think through pretty much all things that we need to around readiness and supporting planning. And they also, you may hear from Leonard or Allison when working on an operation, they really help us make sure that we're connected to the field and supporting the level 4 and up operations. Katie Jansen is our manager over in the disaster client care planning, and she's really helping us think strategically and making sure that we're supporting the field in the best ways possible. Seth Gardner is our disaster client care systems and compliance. And with him is Jamie Snowden's team, who really manages and supports us around all things system related. And Jamie and Ariane are on with us today, as well as Crystal, who really supports all of our work with the Client Care Center. And Chris Davis and her team of Vicky and Malachi also do all of our compliance and data. So when we're trying to figure out where we have opportunities for improvement or how to best tell our story, Chris and her team are really hopping in and helping us think through things in the most strategic way possible. So the programs, when we talk about our programs, we're really talking about our client-facing programs and the work that all of you do. And so really it's from that moment of establishing that initial contact with clients, which is really important, that hello and being there and being that voice that helps a client at the beginning. And then creating that trusting environment so we can support clients' immediate disaster cause needs, whether that is through a hug, a conversation, a cup of coffee, or if that's, thinking through financial assistance needs. And then really we also link clients to other services, both internal and external. So I want to quickly just go through a little bit about our financial assistance and then get into letting the programs walk you through a lot of the work that we do from a program perspective. So this image depicts the places where we have financial assistance and what that looks like. So immediate financial assistance is available on all level 1 through 3s and level 4s. Level 5s, it has to be authorized through national headquarters. And, I really want us, as we think about that 5-year plan and we think about how we provide assistance through disaster health, mental health, spiritual care, is thinking about how we're maximizing those funds and supporting clients in a way that's really helpful and thoughtful and meaningful, and that we're encouraging and supporting you all to utilize what to be able to have that conversation, to be able to think through, what does a client need and how do we provide that support. Fatality-related assistance is that assistance that is provided often through our ICCT teams, and that financial assistance, the authority really lies with our disaster health, mental health, and spiritual care volunteers to be able to provide that. And then supplemental assistance is available on all level 1 through 3, but level 4 and level 5 plus, it is not available. And then the mass casualty incidentals also must be approved by national headquarters. So to provide mass casualty incidentals, that has to be provided through or authorized through national headquarters. But what I think about is the importance of thinking through disaster mental health, disaster spiritual care, disaster health services, financial assistance to see, is there something that's beyond, right, a mass casualty incidental that we should be considering when we're responding and supporting individuals in the field. So that's real quick, real high level, and I am going to turn it over to Mary Rose. So thank you, Mary Rose, and please help us learn a little bit more about disaster health services.
Thank you, Sarah, very much. My name is Mary Rose Bauer. I have been with Disaster Health Services now for 5 years. Disaster Health Services is one of the 3 IDC team. We have Disaster Health Services, Disaster Mental Health, and Disaster Spiritual Care. Next. So with Disaster Health Services, we work very hard to address the unmet needs of our clients. So, we work in both steady state and in disaster situations. So some of the things that we can provide when we're in steady state vary depending on, the situation. We can provide in steady state, we contact clients, we provide them with what they lost during their individual disaster. We work with different groups to help them recover what they need. We work with the communities. Many times we work in local shelters. We also work in the disaster realm. With these groups, we can provide health services to our clients. we actually work when we're in the shelters. We go around and do assessments. And we also many times provide so first aid stations and help functioning throughout the shelter. We collaborate with the in-shelter groups, such as your feeding and your sheltering people. And we perform both physical assessments, and then we do other assessments, which I'll talk about here in just a second. So we coordinate with the public health authorities. So one of the things that we do both during steady state and on DROs is we talk to the health departments. We work in conjunction with them. We do not work separate from them. We contact them as soon as we get on the site when we're on a DRO. We go to meetings with them during steady state and help for planning. And we actually participate in exercises with them. Next. So during your local and steady state time, we can give referrals. So when we're doing our assessment to our different clients, if we find that there is a mental health need or a spiritual care need, we have a way of doing referrals, and we will contact those people. We provide assistance by talking to them about what their needs are. So our goal is to bring them back to where they were before their disaster happened. So we talk about things like medications, medical equipment, glasses, dentures, all those things that you need to stay healthy. And we can provide up to $500 per individual. When we provide that money, that's the amount we can get without having to request extra. We can move beyond the 500 if the need arises and we're able to justify that. We have a process called an RDO exception, which we can use. We also do a lot of health education for clients, and people are always saying to me, well, what kind of education do you do? Well, a lot. Many times when I talk to clients right after they have a fire, I'll talk to them about their what they can use. Like, we don't want them to use their medications until it's been checked out by a pharmacist. Or, if they've got an inhalation injury, they may not be recognizing the signs and symptoms. When they're in shelters, many times people, in the confusion of being in a shelter and in a disaster situation, they sometimes forget the basic things like, oh, I'm diabetic and I need to be watching my blood sugars, or, I need to make sure that all my medications are taken on time, or I may need a dressing change. And we do all that kind of education with our clients, and we actually document that in our RC Care under the Disaster Health Services section. We also do a lot of education for our fellow responders. So I have, in Kentucky, we go to all the different chapter meetings. We usually have a spot that we have in the chapter meetings where we give them little tidbits about what health services can provide, and especially during times like when we had COVID going on, we would give them an update on the COVID reports, for example. On disasters, again, we're in a big congregate situation. We do a physical assessment on both the individual clients, on their families, and then on the shelter in general. So there's a lot of assessment going on. We can provide with the assistance of activities of daily living. And so by that, what we mean is we want people to be able to ambulate or continue to eat the way they were eating before. They need to have their nourishment. So, we have a process that we use to identify all those needs. Let's say they need a cane or a walker or a special bed. We identify those kind of things. And our whole goal for a client in a shelter is that they can continue to live and be able to function like they did when they were at home. Again, in the shelters, we can help them replace medications. We can provide them with medical equipment. We also give them assistance in, accessing the healthcare system. And sometimes that can be a real challenge because when people are in the situation of a shelter, they're not always close to home. And so sometimes we have to get real creative to help them get to the healthcare that they need. And then when we give them things such as medications and so forth on a disaster operation, one fortunate thing about the way healthcare is set up is our funds are not based on the damage like some of the other functions are. So if I have a client that needs medications immediately before immediate assistance has been approved, I can go ahead and put a case in, and we can go ahead and give that client what they need. We also have other ways that we can obtain some of those medications. We've got people that are very good at thinking out of the box and working these processes in different ways for our clients. Again, we provide a lot of health education, and we really ramped this up during COVID. We spent a good deal amount of time talking about cleanliness and everybody staying in 6 feet apart, and we always talked about wearing your mask and so forth, and this was all services that health services provided. We also do care to our responders. So we have in health services a special group called staff health. Generally, they work out of the headquarters, wherever that may be, and they are able to help our different responders as they get ill or injured. And we follow them throughout that course while they're on the disaster operation. And they also further pass that information on to where that person goes to when they go back home, and they will be followed with their staff health person back home. All right, next. So some considerations that we think about when we think about referrals. Some of the referrals that we make are for needing medical assistance, right? So, if a person is feeling ill, if they have something that we might consider contagious, such as, rashes or fevers, during COVID, signs and symptoms of COVID, if they have something that needs to be handled above and beyond what we're capable of handling in the shelter, we may refer them to the local urgent treatment center or an emergency department. We look at what assistance that a client may need for activities of daily living. So we make sure that they can access things like toileting and bathing, that if they need assistance for feeding, that we find out what they need and help provide for those things. When a client's household member has lost or damaged things, what we want to do is make sure that all those things get replaced. So if they had medications, we have a whole process that we go through to get those medications replaced. Durable medical equipment. Not only do we go to durable medical equipment companies and buy those sometimes for clients, we also have agreements in different areas where we can go to get these medical supplies that we can provide to clients. So, as a health services person, we're always sort of working behind the scenes to try to find these little things that we can do that make getting those recoveries done without, costing a major portion of the donor dollar. We're always very conscious of trying to be careful with the donor dollar, but at the same time, we are also wanting to make sure that our clients are fully back to where they should have been before the disaster. Things like eyeglasses and dentures. Many times we provide them with certificates called VSP. Those VSP certificates get clients an eye exam and a basic pair of glasses. And, if you've ever been without your glasses before, that can be a real problem, especially when you're navigating in a place where you're not used to being. And all these people, for the most part, if you're in a shelter, you're displaced, or, if you're in a hotel because your house burned down, you really need those pieces of equipment. And dentures, and people wonder, well, how does that apply to the health services and the medical end of it? Well, if you think about it this way, if I have lost my dentures, then I can't eat like I normally do. And so therefore that becomes a medical problem. So if they had dentures, we want to try to get that taken care of for them also. And any other pieces of equipment that help them to maintain their health. And that is a very wide range, and we have methods of justifying that. And we also consult each other, and we use groups like the Disability Integration Group. If we have one of those access issues that we need some help with, we can contact Disability Integration both locally and on a disaster relief operation. When clients have questions about any health issues, we are there to try to find, if we don't know the answer, we can talk to our colleagues, or we have other ways of finding out that information. But part of our job is to make sure that we get the client's questions answered. Right, next. All right, so another special function that health services does is our pre-deployment screening. So with this pre-assignment health screening, we have a questionnaire that they fill out. And if there is an issue that crops up, say somebody just had surgery, or they have difficulty ambulating, what we do is we have one of these professionals. And keep in mind, health services are all licensed professionals, and so they contact the person before they deploy, and they can help make a determination based on the information that they have for the disaster operation, whether this is going to be a workable situation or not. They can make recommendations as to what should, if we need to put some kind of a accommodation in place for that person, or if this just isn't really a good match for them. We also look at the hardship codes, which is really important because people have a hard time sometimes understanding a hardship code. And I know that every one of you has probably heard of someone who went on disaster operation, and they were not quite aware of the fact that maybe they might be sleeping on a cot as opposed to in a hotel room. These hardship codes are very important. And so one of the things that we do when we do this screening is that we talk to them about these hardship codes, and we make sure that they can work within those parameters. So another group that's we have both during steady state and during disaster operations are our staff health nurses. So these people are individuals that are there for all of our staff. They're there for the people that are out there working. And when we're in steady state, they have various different things that they do. One of them is helping to educate. So they're part of the group that tries to get out information about, things that are going on in the community, like when we had the COVID going on, or if we have outbreaks of the flu and so forth. And they can transmit that information to the local DPMs. They can also talk to the various different groups like the DAT responders who might need that information as they go out into the community. They also do education with the staff about protecting themselves and protecting their clients. Staff health also is a group that functions within the disaster relief operation, and they're there for the health and service of our staff. So if someone gets ill or if someone gets injured, they go to see the staff health people. They contact them. They will make a determination of how serious this injury or illness is, what needs to be done to take care of them, whether they need to be during COVID, we had a lot of people that had to be quarantined. It was the staff health people that made that determination. Staff health also is the group that would send people out if they were injured or ill and needed to go to an urgent care or an emergency department. And they also further, once they've been seen and treated, they will follow that staff member until they get back to home so that we assure that there is a closed loop on taking care of all of our staff. They provide for regular check-ins. So, you know, a lot of times when we have people that are sick and in a hotel room, they will, or if they're in a shelter where they are not doing well, we check in on them and we try to make sure that if they need to be isolated, they're getting all the proper things that they need for that. So we provide things like the ability for them to be tested or seen. We also help them do things like make sure that they get food and that they get whatever it is that they need to be supported with. And then we also work in conjunction with the mental health people who will also work with us in contacting that group. This group keeps a lot of lists and they work in coordination with a group that is in national to coordinate the care for these people. And they also report these numbers up in the disaster operations so that the job director is aware of how many people that we have out due to illness or injury. And next. So we have two key pieces of collections that we can do while we're on a disaster operation. The first one is our CMIST form. So CMIST is form that we use, and it's newly now attached to the registration program that just was activated. But the purpose of the CMIST form is for one of the disaster health services staff to interview the family, and we use the CMIST as a unit, family unit, to look at things like, do they have any communication issues? So that, you know, say if we've got somebody that's deaf, or if we've got somebody that needs special equipment to communicate with, that we can get that put in place. M is for maintaining health. So, you know, whatever needs that means, like medications, is there special equipment that they need? What do they need for independence? So, you know, we try to make sure that they're able to ambulate. Do they need to have the right bed? Do they, are they close enough to, say, a plug if they need to run an electric piece of equipment, such as a CPAP machine? Or do they need to be close to a bathroom so that they can independently get themselves to the bathroom? We also look at all those safety issues. Safety meaning we make sure that they're in a situation where we're not putting them in danger. So, you know, no tripping cords, making sure that their beds are spread far enough apart that they can walk. We try to make sure that we have all the hand sanitizers in place and that we have adequate bathrooms that are clean. We also provide support services. So that can encompass a lot of things. We work with our mental health and spiritual care people for support services. And self-determination, and that's a really key issue. We have to keep in mind that these people were functioning independently before they came to us. And although we may not always agree with the way they functioned, it is their right of self-determination to be able to continue to function in that manner. And so we try to very much make that happen. Transportation. So transportation can be a tricky issue, but you know, many times we have people that are, say, on dialysis or have regular appointments if they're pregnant, or, you know, if they need to go to an urgent care center. All those things require transportation. And so we have ways to make arrangements to try to get them taken care of. So those CMIST forms, all that information is collated, and then not only do we fill it out initially, we also are sharing that information with the shelter managers so that they are aware of what needs their shelter has, and everybody can work together to make sure that all those needs are met. Then we have our Dharma app. So this has been in place for about a year now. I was actually fortunate enough to get to be one of the trial groups to use this. And this basically is an app that's you use on your phone, and every individual that we meet with will go into this collection. So we look at things like, do they have an illness? Do they have an injury? What are the basic reasons for why we're seeing this? And are we doing to help them out? Now, this only collects aggregate data. It does not collect individual client information. So it is not like a charting system. It's actually information that's collected by the CDC so that we know what types of services that we're providing in our shelters. And when we do this and we collaborate with the CDC, they provide us with reports that tell us what some of our trends are. So, for example, one of the things that we found over time in using this app is that the major reason why we do that, what we do in the shelters, is for health maintenance. Health maintenance meaning I make sure that they have their medications. I make sure that they have the right equipment that they need, that sort of thing. So, that's important information to both us and the CDC. All right. And so that's pretty much a good overview of what health services does. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary Rose. We'll go on to Naomi to talk about disaster mental health.
And I think my camera's on. Hi, my name is Naomi Berkowitz. I've been with the disaster mental health team, probably going on my 23rd year. This talk, I never know how to prepare for one of these. I never know who's going to be on, who's going to know about what mental health does, who's actually worked in a shelter or on or whether a deployment or in steady state with somebody from the DMH team. So please feel free to put questions in the Q&A if I'm not covering something that you do have questions about. So I'm not going to read the slides to you. I trust that each of you can read the slides on your own. But what I do want to tell you is that the DMH team, again, the only acronyms I will use is DMH, Disaster Mental Health, is made up of professional mental health providers with specific education, as well as Red Cross training. Even though our team, sorry, that was embarrassing. Even though our team is made up of licensed and retired professionals who are not necessarily working in the way that we do in our professional life. Okay, what we do in the preparedness stage is we try to build relationships with community mental health agencies. We teach psychological first aid and coping in today's world to community groups. We build DMH capacity through recruitment, training, meetings, exercises, and drills. And we work on gathering information about resources in our area. In the response phase, we work with disaster responders, clients, and the community by using psychoeducation, stress management, and coping techniques. During and after disaster relief operations or difficult DAT responses, we may reach out to responders to see how they are doing and to remind them about taking care of their emotional health. If a client needs additional mental health services, we make referrals to community mental health agencies. If appropriate, we can assist with financial assistance and other resources. And you heard about the $500 that health services uses. Well, we share that $500 with them. So if a client is going to be continuing seeing a mental health provider and there are co-payments or uh, maybe they don't have insurance and they need to pay for some of these services, we can use that money for that. We can also help with transportation to and from their appointments. Uh, we can use part of this money to help replace comfort items. Those are only a few of the things. You know, if there's a need that would help with a mental health concern, we look into it and we try to make it happen. All right. Let's see. Next slide, please. Okay, so we respond as written here, we respond to Red Cross clients and workforce in a kind and compassionate manner to alleviate immediate distress and mitigate long-term psychological consequences. Okay, so we don't replace the community mental health system or resources. We do not duplicate services. We make referrals. We advocate when necessary. We try and always keep in mind the Red Cross mission, its fundamental principles, and the DMH protocols, and we keep that forefront in our work. Our education helps us recognize where a client or a responder is emotionally and use it to help them through whatever stress they are experiencing. We never want a client to become dependent upon us. Our goal is to help them use their own strengths to get through what is probably one of the worst days of their lives. Each client, community partner, and disaster responder is unique. They have their own background, their own experiences, their own support network. What works for one person doesn't necessarily work for the next. We take this into consideration when we're working with people. We also do post-deployment follow-up screening for disasters, which include fatalities or mass casualties. We try to incorporate approaches that meets the client's need where they're at, as well as the responder. Next slide, please. All right, so where is it that we provide these services? The expression, which I actually learned about recently, so it's not I did not coin this. This is not mine. It's MHBWA, which stands for Mental Health by Walking Around. We meet the client where they are, whether it's the driveway, the hotel lobby, the service center, shelters, by going door to door, by speaking with them on the phone. If it's somebody deployed, so a disaster responder, we meet with them wherever they are, which include all of those places that I mentioned, as well as perhaps the DRO headquarters. But bottom line is we meet the client or we meet the disaster responder where they are at. So it could be just about anywhere. Next slide, please. All right. So disaster mental health contact is not what we would do in our regular professional life. Okay, so in other words, we're not doing traditional psychotherapy or any other therapeutic modalities. We don't make that long-term connection with a client. We do not make formal assessments or evaluations. We don't come up with treatment plans. Okay, the other thing we don't do is we don't do a formal, and I'm talking about a program debriefing. Okay, our interventions are short term. Again, we're not building that therapeutic alliance. But what we do is we focus on that short-term intervention, even though we are licensed or retired mental health professionals. Okay, we do speak with groups in terms of whether it's teaching them psychological first aid or coping in today's world. We meet with them to do to just let them talk about what that disaster was for them, and we help them with coping strategies or stress management skills that will help them move forward after this disaster. Uh, Again, our work is short term, it's supportive. We don't build therapeutic relationships, but we always adhere to our own professional code of ethics and our standards. Next slide, please. All right. So when should you refer to DMH? Okay. First of all, I want to say we operate under the assumption that most people are resilient and they will return to their pre-disaster level of functioning. We expect that clients will have crying spells, anger outbursts, feelings of anxiety, sadness, etc. Those are typical reactions to stress. However, if a client or somebody in the disaster team is experiencing or saying that they are intending to harm themselves or others, please call 911 and then notify somebody on the DMH team. If you're speaking with somebody who's not able to meet their basic needs, so hygiene, eating, sleeping, they're having nightmares, uh, maybe they're using coping skills that are not helpful. You know, maybe they're drinking too much. Maybe they're using street drugs. Maybe they're gambling, uh, excessive shopping, erratic behavior, anything like that. That would be a reason to contact somebody on the DMH team. If a family member or loved one has a concern about their loved one's behavior, maybe it's changed and they're just not bouncing back the way the family member thinks they should, please contact somebody on the DMH team. If you're speaking with somebody and they report that a family member or a loved one died in the disaster, or somebody is unaccounted for, or seriously injured, that would be another reason to contact somebody on the DMH team. And of course, if somebody, whether a client or a coworker, wants to speak with somebody on the DMH team, by all means, please make that referral or encourage them to speak with one of us. And lastly, when it comes to children needing DMH services, we work with the adult in the child's life. So please remember that when you're making a referral, specifically if you're opening cases in RC care, it's the adult we will be working with, because that adult will be working with the child long after the Red Cross is gone. So make the referral to the adult and know that our team is trained to ask about other household members, especially children, if we see that they're listed in that household. So please use your good judgment, and if you think that they need a DMH contact, by all means, we are here. We are here for you. If you have questions about what is typical behavior after a disaster, we are here. If you yourself just wants to speak with one of us, and certainly we are here for community members. So thank you, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Naomi. My name is Thomas Margrave. I'm a volunteer. I've been a member of the Red Cross team for about 12 years. Before that, I spent 6 years helping out Greater New York as a member of the Disaster Chaplaincy Services New York. I'll be sharing with Tim Serban, who is our national volunteer partner. Disaster spiritual care. We're interested in the spiritual well-being of clients, other Red Crossers, and people we meet in the community. Could be pastors, could be firefighters, whatever. So I won't belabor what's on the slide, and certainly in the questions after this, we'll be happy to answer questions. I am in the middle of a severe thunderstorm. Welcome to the Northeast. And so I may lose picture, and if that's the case, then Tim will jump in and pick up, even if I'm supposed to be doing the slide. Next slide, please.
Great.
Tim?
Good afternoon. Yeah, thanks, Tom, and good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see you. I'm Tim Serban, and yes, I've had the honor of being part of the Red Cross for about 24 years now, and it is great to join you and be with you today. We're going to be talking about spiritual care, what it is, what it isn't, and one of the things that we want to start and really mention about disaster spiritual care is that disaster spiritual care really is consistent with our Red Cross fundamental principles of neutrality, impartiality, and universality. Just we always start there and say that this is where we begin. It is not necessarily about religious care. We ensure that everyone understands that spiritual care and religious care are really different. We believe that every person is a spiritual person, whether or not they are formally connected to a formal religion or faith community. And we support and appreciate that really that our goal is to provide appropriate and respectful disaster spiritual care for our clients, for our support volunteers as well through the journey. We really support clients in their affiliation. We respect their diversity and differences, including culture, gender, age, orientation, spiritual and religious practices, etc., and their disability as well. And we focus on what we call the National VOAD, or the National Volunteer Organizations Active in Disasters, fundamental areas of points of consensus that we've all agreed upon on how we approach a person who's vulnerable in a disaster scenario, which is not providing unwanted religious items, not imposing one's agenda, or refraining from any manipulation, disrespect, or any exploitation of how a person may be impacted by the trauma. We want to respect that sensitivity and vulnerability as well. Tom, is there anything else that you want to highlight in these areas?
I would also point out that if we're in a Red Cross managed situation, we're on the lookout for people that may be trying to manipulate the vulnerability of our clients. I regularly, when I've deployed, go around picking up things that are aimed to exploit their unwanted religious items. So we try to create an environment where the client can focus on their own recovery and of a spiritual nature. Good treatment.
Okay.
Thanks, Tim. Next slide.
I'll go to the next slide. Thank you. And so when we are seeking to make a referral for disaster spiritual care, we really are seeking to support this. These are the things that we will do. So we support the needs of whether a person is seeking a religious service or sacred ritual. Oftentimes, if there's been a mass casualty event or a loss of life, we will be called in to provide a coordinated, really the facilitating the interfaith service with other members of the community. We help to those who voice a loss of hope or search for meaning in the sense of seeking to make sense of suffering. We often say that spirituality is one search for meaning, and so everyone connects with that question oftentimes. Also, we support one's need in grief, those who experience a death or loss of a loved one or their home or their pet. It has implications of how they find their balance and how their spiritual well-being is balanced and supported. And so we come alongside them. We partner with our mental health colleagues as well to ensure that we provide the holistic approach to body, mind, and spirit, the whole person. So our health services, mental health, spiritual care, in our disability integration as well. We also respond to a loss of those who've been disconnected from their faith community. Often a disaster moves us away from their faith community. We often say that people try to find their connectedness in a grounded place. That may be a nature park or their faith community or someplace, and that may be overwhelmed with water or part of the disaster. And so when they're out of that community, we help to facilitate a connection to that which is meaningful to them. We also facilitate our clients' support of their faith leader. If they're seeking to connect and reconnect with their tradition, we call them and connect with them. We respond to requests for prayer or spiritual support from the Red Cross. And most importantly as well, we want to ensure that we offer, as of March, we have been able to offer financial authority to fund the replacement or loss of damaged or destroyed spiritual or religious articles. That's in the amount of about $50, and it begins to help a person reconnect and get grounded with the things that they might have lost, whether it's spiritual, whether it's religious, those items that are meaningful to them. We have the ability to include this as another part of our care for the whole person and help them in their recovery. Next slide.
I would also say that that $50 is for each member in a primary client's household that has lost or damaged an item important in their spiritual or religious practice. So they all need to go on the IC Care case. And like disaster health services and mental health, even before individual assistance is authorized, we can open a case and provide that $50. So we support those who are helping, like mental health. We do a lot of walking around, and we provide support to our fellow Red Crossers, particularly for people who have not gone to a response in which there is a tremendous amount of damage. The level of physical destruction can overwhelm Red Crossers too. Looking at Fort Myers Beach reminded me of looking at bombed out damage from World War II, and where there's just nothing. And this can have an impact on our workforce. Our people are disconnected from their faith communities. They may not be in a position where they can even contact family members at home. Our folks in Guam are 16 hours and a day ahead of we who are certainly on the East Coast of the United States. And we support our fellow Red Crossers by our presence. In Guam particularly, we helped set up the first of the Red Cross managed shelters. My headquarters manager ended up unplugging a toilet in one of these shelters. We're here to help. We're here to work cooperatively with our colleagues in mental health and health services. It's a team effort. Over to you, Tim.
Great, Tom. Yes, we are. We will do our best to do whatever is needed, but don't call us plumbers. So we'll do our best.
Not our first choice.
We do also connect deeply with our community responders. We have a deep connection to those in the faith leaders that are impacted by the destruction. Oftentimes their communities are in disarray, and we are often there to reach out, provide them some resources that they can extend to their churches, their faith communities, or their synagogues or mosques. Also, our DSC workers interact with emergency services personnel who may not have a connection to a chaplaincy organization, or they may be from other places in other states coming locally to a disaster relief operation from a distance. And so providing extended support to them is something we do as well. Our workers also assist in the role as liaison or advisor with faith community leaders in coordinating what we would describe as a national or community memorial service. This often happens after a mass casualty event when, at the close of the recovery effort, a national service is held. We ensure in our role that we ensure that everyone has a place on the stage. We rarely ever stand on the stage. We ensure that there's a representation of those that were represented or those whose lives were lost are present there, and that it doesn't become a political event, but more of a recognition of the celebration of one's life, of those who were lost. And we also support the site visits at times when families wish to go to the place where their loved ones last lived. And so we support that in a meaningful way. And finally, our DSC workers engage with our national VOAD community partners, our event-based volunteers to support what we would, again, the long-term recovery. As we talk about the long-term recovery, there's long-term spiritual recovery of an entire community. And those organizations begin entering as we transition. And so we ensure that there is a warm handoff together around the support that is happening at those transition points. And we often seek to make the community stronger than where they were before by helping to orient, train, and again, most recently in the Mawar, Guam disaster, we've just trained a number of DSC volunteers just last week, for those who will stay within the community and continue to maintain an appropriate, respectful support to the community in their ongoing long-term recovery. So with that.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks.
Next slide.
Thank you both, Tim and Tom. We'll go ahead and throw it over to Ariane and Jamie.
Thanks, Allison. So on RC Care, we wanted to highlight a few things very specific to IDC to help share information and make sure people are aware. The first thing is documenting in RC Care. There are two types of areas that you can document in, and they have different visibilities. So it's important to know, one of the biggest things you also need to know is that comments cannot be edited. So once you have it in there, it's there. So it's important to make sure that when we do have confidential information, that we are documenting it in the correct place. The two places that you can document are general documentations. So just kind of letting people have situational awareness of you making contact with the client. That's probably the biggest feedback that you can give to other people that are touching the case, is knowing when you called so they're not calling 5 minutes later, or they can get information from you if you have general information that you can share. This is captured on the case record in the feed section. This is also a great place for you to see caseworker notes so that you can have some awareness before you're contacting clients. The other location is in the IDC service within your specific tab of health services, mental health, spiritual care, or the ICCT tab. Only those that have the IDC worker access can view these notes. So within here, you can add specific information of you've spoke with the pharmacist and the cost is X, Y, and Z, or a specific prescription was lost in the fire, or a specific pharmacy is who you're connecting with. This is information that if the other IDC worker looks at it, it's in a confidential space, but it's not available for everyone to know. Allison, if you'll go to the next slide for me. The financial assistance is a very big piece, a very big hurdle for understanding, so we want to spend some time on it. The financial assistance that we have that's been mentioned is health services and mental health can give $500 per person on a case. So if there's 6 people and all 6 people need financial assistance for IDC, they can each qualify for up to $500 without an additional RDO exception and approval process. Fatality assistance is $1,000 per fatality that's related to the disaster, and spiritual care has $50 per person. The IDC financial assistance is authorized for all event levels. It does not it's not contingent on there being damage assessment in the case, or whatever the damage level is, does not matter for IDC assistance. What is required is we have to have the ID and the event confirmed. That information is found on the case record under the eligibility section. And you won't be able to process funds. The system is going to give you a heads up before you can pay out the funds that you've created, stating that the ID and event event has to be confirmed. And you can get support through recovery if that information has not been completed and you're trying to get financial assistance to a client. The information also, or excuse me, the financial assistance is also provided to the primary client on the case. They're the ones that get the client assistant card, or they have their information that will collect the EFT. But the IDC service on the case is who you're documenting all of the information and you're paying the money through. So if the secondary client needs funds, you're documenting it on the secondary client's assistance, but it ultimately gets paid to the primary client. And I think that's important to note. So to give financial assistance, the way we do it is in the IDC tab, there is a financial assistance tab and a fatality assistance tab. The fatality assistance one is when you have a deceased person on a case. It is on their IDC service that you will pay fatality assistance through. You can't do it on the primary client. If that's who you're trying to pay out, it's going to stop you to say that the primary client's condition does not meet the eligibility of fatality assistance. And again, you're going to be adding financial assistance to the person that it is for. And that's your key, is you go to the person it's for and you're going to load the information on there. For financial assistance for the living, you're going to be adding service line items based on what they need. And I will show, I believe, on the next page here that this is what it looks like for the service lines. So you will add the information of what it entails. These can be edited after you add them. You can adjust the dollar amount by clicking the arrow button next to it and clicking edit, or you can click the blue name, and you can edit the information as needed after you've added it before you've paid out. This information, once we collect it all, again, it's very specific for the client and the information you need. You can choose if you do, to pay them all at once, so you're creating one commitment, or if you have all the information you have and know that you may have to pay out in a couple of days, you can do that as well, and you can choose not to hold up the funds, pay them what you know, and then 2 days later you can come back and keep adding additional service line items up to the amount that is the max before an approval is needed. That approval, it's $500 total for what you've put on here. So if you go to the next page for me, the two ways that we give financial assistance through is through an EFT, an electronic funds transfer, or it's through a client assistant card. This is one thing that's good to know when talking to the client. You can also see on the case record what they've previously been given, if they've been given assistance from us already, like, for example, immediate assistance. If they haven't been given that, or if they want to change up their method of payment, they can absolutely do that for your individual disaster care assistance. The system is going to automatically trigger you to pick EFT as the primary. That's what's the first prompt is going to be. But if that does not work for the client using the MasterCard Send, the PayPal, the Zelle, the Walmart direct cash pickup, is they can choose that the options above will not work for the client. And then when you're on the next page, when you click next and you go to the next prompts, there is these CACs won't work for the client if you need to add a brand new CAC. If the client's already received a CAC, you're going to see a drop-down option for you to pick an existing CAC. You just have to note that if there's already been 4 loads on the CAC, or if the CAC is expired, it's not going to show available for you. But if you do have the CAC number, because it's a brand new case and it's an IDC case, you've worked with a caseworker and you've got the card, or if you know one's going to get mailed to the client, you want to get the card going and get it logged in the case, is that when you click that these CACs won't work for the client, you're going to be given a blank CAC proxy number box. When you add the new CAC in there, it's going to ask you to confirm, and then you can choose to load or issue but not load if we're mailing the card. So IDC has all of the availabilities for providing funds that a caseworker has when they are going through the IDC assistance. Go to the next one for me. Thank you. RDO and DRO director exceptions. This is needed when, for a client, you want to provide more than $500 specifically for a client. This is an exception is allowed per service. So if you have 3 people on a case and they all need RDO exceptions, you can request it for those individuals on one case. So it's not an RDO exception per case, but per service, if that makes sense. The total amount of exception can't be more than $1,250. So you may request 500 plus an additional $1,250 for an RDO exception. And you can't request more than that because the system's going to stop you from asking more than that. That's our max cap that we have on a case. But if it's up to that dollar amount, it's going to go to a casework supervisor to review and sign off. And it's not so much that they're approving you asking for it. They're just making sure everything's in order for it to process to the RDO or the DRO director for them to approve it and then a casework supervisor can resolve the funds and it can be issued to the client. These are also supposed to be made within 30 days of case creation. They can be made afterwards if there is an extenuating circumstance, but our goal is to get it done within 30 days. And the last topic that we want to share highlights on is closing the IDC service. So after completing the work on a service activity, you're going to change the status of the service that you are working to request closed. And you should confirm that your activity, has everything closed, that if you're finishing up with a case, that you're going through all of the IDC services for that entire case and closing them out. You also should not be adjusting other IDC activities. So say spiritual care is listed as request assigned. You shouldn't be changing that if you're not the one doing spiritual care, unless you're specifically asked to for support on getting that updated. Is that you're focusing just on your activity that you're working on and you're changing that status to request closed. The IDC service, it will automatically close after all of them are either null or request closed. If any stay in new request or request assigned, the case will stay open for forever. So we want to make sure that we're very timely on getting them closed so that we can continue the process for the client on getting a case finished. If a case does need to get a case can be reopened if the case is open, the service can be reopened if the case is still open. All you have to do is go back into the service, click the edit buttons, and then change it from request closed to request assigned. You can open it back up with your access. If a case has been fully closed, though, a casework supervisor, I believe, caseworker might be able to reopen the case for the IDC worker to continue working it if that need is still there. And you only need to manually update a case if it needs to go to closed. You should never have to touch it on the case details unless it's a duplicate or another on the same event. If there's two cases out there, or if it needs to be closed for compliance reasons. If there's any issues related to that, then we would want to get that closed and get a review done on it. And it would also come out of your queue at that point. So that covers my section on RC Care, and I am going to push it back to Sarah.
I think I am going to go ahead and grab this. Thank you, Ariane. In the interest of time, this has been an absolutely marvelous presentation. Thank you, everybody. I know that we're getting towards the bottom of the hour, so I am going to skip ahead a little bit. We had a couple of slides that we wanted to cover, but they will be there for you after you get these slides, including the support channels that we have talked about. You've likely seen this before. I'm not going to run through this, as you will get the slides to look at after this session, in addition to some data resources that may benefit you. So I'd like to jump right into questions and answers. Given the time, I do understand that we are approaching the bottom of our session. I think that we will keep this running as long as there's interest and appetite for maybe a little bit longer, so that we can get some questions answered. There have been some great questions coming in through the Q&A feature. We have gone ahead and published them and are seeing answers within the Q&A, so please keep an eye on that. In the meantime, please go ahead and ask your questions. Use the Q&A feature in Teams. We also, as I mentioned at the top, will be using Menti. And if you're looking at your screen, if you go to menti.com and enter this code 26711118 or scan the QR code, you will be taken to our session within Menti and can ask your question within that. So let me just give it a minute here. It does look like we've got some questions coming in. I've published a number of questions in the Q&A. So if you want to take a look at those, we had a couple of CAC questions. We had some questions about some of our acronyms that we've answered, along with the best way to introduce clients to DMH services, or how we support shelter clients who normally access AA meetings. So please take a look at some of those as you're asking some of our questions. I will answer a question that we often get, was this recorded? I'm not going to go ahead and publish that, but I will share again that we are recording this and it will be posted to our YouTube playlist. There is a link within this PowerPoint presentation that you will get at the end once everything has been cut and finalized and everything, and we send out that. Oh, we've got a couple of those. Okay. Please bear with me. I've got a question from Elizabeth Bispo out of Central and South Texas. Let me make sure. Once DHS, DMH, DSC are completed, the name of the worker disappears. It's impossible to run a report when on closed cases for purposes such as quality review for coaching team members. Is there a way that names won't disappear after cases are closed, or is that anything that you are aware of?
We are aware of that. That was by design. That was an original ask that names disappear. So that way workers could just filter on the cases that they are assigned to. It is different for recovery planning because recovery planning only has one activity. It's just recovery planning. And so they're an actual service owner, whereas IDC workers are activity owners inside the service. We are planning to do rework to the IDC service as a whole over the next year, and this will be part of the feedback that we take with us as we decide to make some enhancements to make the service better.
Thanks, Jamie. I've got a question here. It's specific for cases from Karen. If a client is the only person in the home and died in the fire, do they get funeral help?
I'll take that one, Allison. Yes, the case, well, they don't, but their next of kin does. So a case should be open for a non-resident primary client as someone who will receive that fatality assistance on behalf for that deceased individual. So a case will be opened in a different person's name because we cannot open a case for a deceased person. And then the deceased person will be added to the case. And then an ICCT service will be created for that deceased person. And then they can issue fatality assistance to the next of kin.
Thanks, Jamie. Let's see. How can I identify which cases need DSC attention? And how do I close a DSC part of the case once the client has been contacted?
So that's something that Ariane went over a little bit. You on the IDC service, each activity, health services, mental health, spiritual care, ICCT, they all have an individual status and they all have an individual service activity owner. So when you are done with your section, and in this one, if it's spiritual care, you know, when you get assigned to it, it starts out a new request, you get assigned to it, you update that status to request assigned. When you're done, you just change that status to request closed. If you're the only activity on that service or you're the last open one, it will close the service. And if it's the last service opened on a case, it will close the case.
Thanks, Jamie.
Allison, before you get into the next question, one thing I do want to share, piggybacking on Jamie's comment earlier with updating the IDC modules and the coming, is that in the fall, what we hope to do once we have a timeline around the potential is do listening sessions with health, mental health, and spiritual care around what's working well with the modules, what isn't, you know, what is cumbersome, and try to do our best around making the right updates to the system so it works as a tool and a support, and making sure that we're supportive and hearing what the needs are from the field.
Thanks, Sarah. All right, I've got a question here. It's from somebody who is anonymous, so sorry I don't have a name. I see that the Disaster Mental Health Standards and Procedures was last published in January of 2017. Are there any plans to update this document?
Well,
I'm
I'm not sure if that question's addressed to me. It is my understanding that a lot of our standards and procedures and perhaps our coursework is in the process of being looked at and updated. So as far as I know, the answer is yes.
And I would back you up on that, Naomi. We are currently in, as some of you may know, we've done some purging perhaps of older content on the exchange, getting ready for the migration of content to our new exchange, new name to be determined. So that in conjunction with a process being done through a third-party company to look at our structure of doctrine. So we are expecting, I don't have a timeline, but are expecting to know, what that looks like in the future as well. Will we still have S&Ps? Will we still have job tools? We don't know. It might be a new structure. So we don't have that answer yet, but to back Naomi up, we are looking at our standards and procedures just in general and making sure that we have some of the best content ready for whatever our next structure of doctrine looks like. Okay, I have another, Dan, actually, I think I'll ask you if you've got any questions on Menti?
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Just a note for folks. So obviously, the folks that are only able to use Menti won't be able to see the things that are published in the Q&A on Teams. And some folks have made a point of that. So point taken. What we can do is either try to send you, when we send out the email with the link to the recording, maybe we can try to send you those published items. I'm not sure. But I do see one question here in Menti, Allison, that we can address, and that is, will there be any training on virtual support of clients by DHS?
I think I can answer that. At this time, we have not got anything specifically planned. The thing about the concern with virtual support is it's varied depending on the situation that you're in. But I will take that back to the group and look at that, because there may be some things that we can do around that.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary Rose. I do see just one additional comment that I want to address. Looks like somebody just was a little frustrated with the Q&A or a lack of Q&A availability on their teams. I just want to say it's great that folks were able to get onto Menti and to ask a question here. So we're doing our best to kind of adjudicate the different tech systems that we have. So we've made Menti available for folks that aren't able to access Q&A. Unfortunately, we're not able to do much past that to make it more accessible. But Allison, that's all I have for questions here on the Menti side.
Thanks, Dan. If you wouldn't go too far from the mic, I know that you have a potential answer for this question. Would it be possible to add translation, ASL transcription services to ARC presentations?
I do have an answer to that question. So it's actually a really timely topic. We have somebody who is just onboarded as our new disability integration program lead. And I know this is something that's on the forefront of her mind as well, or at least making sure that meetings are accessible and available to everyone. So what I can say is that transcriptions and CART services require a paid person to do that transcription live. So it's something that we just have to look at a cost. That would be like a Jack Herman senior director kind of answer to give around that. But what I will say is that Microsoft Teams does work with assistive technology devices, so screen readers and things like that. So Again, we're doing our best to make sure that things are accessible. I will also add here, if folks have any challenges registering, I know there's been some issues, but if folks have questions either about assistive technology or have issues registering or are aware of folks that have either challenges registering or need assistance with registering, please reach out to us at clientcare@redcross.org.
Great, thanks, Dan. I have another question from Elizabeth Bispo, likely for Jamie or Ariane. There are still some intermittent problems that the IDC service doesn't automatically close when all IDC functions requested have been individually closed. Is that a glitch being worked on?
Sorry, having trouble with my mute button. If you have examples of those, could you please send them to clientcare@redcross.org? As Ariane was going over, the current functionality that we see every day is that they do automatically close, but they only automatically close the first time that you close them. If they get reopened, they will need to be manually reclosed. So if you have examples where it did not close automatically the first time, please send them to clientcare@redcross.org so that we can take a look at them and let the technical team know that that's not working.
Thanks, Jamie. And with that, I am out of questions. I'll do a check for Dan real quick to see if he has any.
I am not seeing anything.
All right. I know that we are a couple of minutes over, so I'll go ahead and send this to Sarah to close us out.
I just wanted to thank everyone for your participation today. And I know that I've gotten a few emails from you, so I will respond to people who have reached out to me and make sure that we follow up. But thank you everyone for joining us. Please, if this was helpful, share the link with others in your regions and those that you often work with. But I just really look forward to continuing working with you all and also thinking about what this collaboration means as a client care programs team and continuing this work. So thank you all. Have a great day. Really, really appreciate everyone being here today. Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
And big thank you to all of our volunteers who presented today. We really asked a lot from the group and I really appreciated their feedback.